Good evening. It's Monday, July 8th, 2019. That means that it is our journal number 103, T+97. It's getting to be a reality here. Um, this going home stuff. Went to the doctor today, had a clinic visit. It was all very interesting. Um, Numbers were a little bit lower than I would have liked. However, they hadn't dropped as precipitously as they've dropped in the past, which is a good thing and kind of exciting. Um, but something interesting happened, and it's something that we've kind of touched on before, but realistically, it's not something that I've gone into depth on, and it was actually something that I thought about actually cheating and creating a crib sheet because I think it's kind of important. But this is the way it started out. Is generally the last thing that we do at the hospital is visit with the doctor. So we have blood draws and whatnot. So today it was a blood draw, um, and normally we follow that by going directly to the doctor. But today, getting ready to be discharged from this particular portion of the treatment process, I had an electrocardiogram and I had an echocardiogram. Um, And like the pulmonary function test, I was told by the technician, this ain't going to stop you from going home, which was really good to hear. Because even though it's not likely that I'm going to get stopped from going home, it still crosses your mind every once in a while. It, I know enough people here that it's happened to that you get nervous enough. And it happened to me once already when I was told I was going to leave the hospital um, a few days earlier than I was discharged, only to find out that I spiked a fever and wound up there for about 3 days longer than I would have otherwise been there. So things can change in a heartbeat, and that's no different now than it was before. But we met with the doctor after the EKG and the echo, and we were kidding around. He explained the numbers. Everything was good. And as we were leaving, I was kidding around with him, and our daughter Dana had once asked me if we were to do a 23 and me test, would she still, be identified if we both did it? Would she still be identified as my daughter? And I thought I knew what the answer to that question was going to be based upon everything that we've discussed before. And but as I've mentioned in the past, I'm what's considered a chimera. That's one organism with characteristics or traits of two different organisms, and in this case, it would be the stem cells of my donor and what they've done to my blood um, and DNA. And it was fascinating because what he said was that it depends on how they did the test. What do you mean? He followed up with, if they were to do a cheek swab for the DNA testing, I would come up as me, the me I was before. But if they were to draw blood, I would come up as the donor, as someone else with different DNA entirely. And it's been fascinating me, this whole idea of being a chimera, of being a composite now of two different people. What kind of impact is that going to have on me, on my life, on the way I think, on what I do, or what I feel? Um, and maybe I overthink it too much, but I'm very well aware of that, and I try to follow it with interest. So it becomes an issue of, are we talking about um, nature or nurture, genetics or environment, and what has the biggest impact on who you are, how you think, how you react, what you do, how you do it, and what's important to you. And there are things that are starting to turn up. I mean, You won't notice this perhaps, but I do. The areas up here on the top part of my beard are much darker than they were prior to the transplant and prior to losing all of it um, through the chemo. Um, so you got to wonder if you're having, manifestations like that, um, what else is going on? If this was a powerful enough experience to actually eliminate an extra chromosome from my genome, still haven't figured out what that chromosome does, by the way. Um, it certainly doesn't look like being without it has hurt anything. Then what are all of these other traits and characteristics going to look like when this process is finished? And I say finished because, I'm still a work in process, according to the doctors and the medical staff at the hospital. In almost every respect, uh, mostly because of the scarring that occurred inside the marrow or the blood cell producing areas of the body, the big bones, the femur, the pelvic girdle, um, you know, things like that. And it'll take a full year before the stem cells have been able to regenerate those areas, if they're successful in regenerating those areas at all. I mean, we discuss an awful lot with the doctor, and the number of things that come up, are not necessarily things you want to hear. Like, for instance, your hemoglobin level may be, your new normal for hemoglobin may be low, and you'll have to adjust your workout schedule and your exercise and everything else accordingly. So I think about that a lot. I think about the idea of genetics and environment. A lot of who I am was determined by the fact that I was in business in partnership with my mom and dad for the better part of 40 years. Uh, I think of nature uh, versus nurture in that same regard. I was raised by my grandmother, who was an immigrant from Eastern Europe and had very strong values and didn't have any problem, sharing those values, and became a huge part of my early life, probably till I was 17 and she passed, 18 and she passed. And the question then in my mind is do you overcome the genetics of who you are, or can you overcome the genetics of who you are um, by sheer uh, effort, by just the sheer power of your own will? Uh, if you apply everything that you know and everything that you've been taught about behavior uh, into your own circumstance. And I don't have an answer to that. And quite frankly, the fact that I don't have an answer to that bothers me. Although I have to tell you, thus far, I feel pretty much like the me I was before, only the fact that I get tired more easily. I'm certainly more introspective. I'm certainly more patient than I ever was before. Um, is that somebody else's stem cells, or is that just the fact that I've been through a lot and had epiphany after epiphany after epiphany of self-realization that I'm not sure I would have had otherwise? So what is it? Is it nature? Is it nurture? Is it genetics? Is it environment that makes you who you are? Or do you have a real um, role in deciding who that person is and will be? Um, and in my case, if there is something to this business of being a Chimera, who I will become as a result of the influence of my donors' stem cells. Um, I don't know. As of now, I feel pretty much the same, um, but that could change. The other issue is that we won't know what's going on until Friday. Friday, I'll go into the hospital really early, earlier than I would like. Uh, Probably, I will have my blood drawn, and then I'll go to the evaluation treatment center for the procedure to have my bone marrow biopsy, and the results of the blood work will determine to a large degree whether I get the PICC line out or not at this particular moment, and also whether or not I get to actually pack up the car and get out of here. Fact of the matter is, the room will be already packed up, and we'll leave on Friday, probably regardless of what anybody says, because 101 days. It's actually more than that because we took up residency down here before the transplant and before the conditioning began. So that 110, 108, however many days it is as much as I love the area and the people here and the hotel and the hospital. Um, I think I need to go home to start to complete my recovery. Um, so in the meantime, stay well, take care. Um, Certainly, this is something to think about. Uh, see you tomorrow. Bye bye.